So a little bit about our panel. My name is Franny Snedeker. I'm the Director of Client Services at Envoy Global. Our panel is Jill Sobel from KLA, Tom LeBaron from Confluent, and my very own colleague Brandon Cogan from Envoy Global. And I wanted to sort of set the table, so to speak, with some of our, intentions coming into this session today. So our panel, we've met a few times before today, not only to sort of design and refine the topics that we wanted to cover and what we wanted to chat about with you all today, but to have one important goal, which is actionable takeaways. So whether you are brand new to global immigration, mobility, you're building your program for the first time and you want to understand how the compliance piece should tie in, or you're a veteran to this field and you've been at it for years and maybe you're kind of looking at some component you might want to tweak or you're benchmarking, we hope that you will leave this session today with some actionable takeaways to continue to improve the compliance aspect of your program. I'm going to first pass it to Brendan to talk a little bit about himself and his background before we kick things off.
Yep. Thanks, Franny. Hi, everybody. Brandon Coggin, one of the partners with our Boys Global Immigration Practice and also the SVP of Global Services. Been in the space, mostly in the non-U.S. immigration space for the last 15 years.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Tom LeBaron. I am based actually here in Salt Lake City, Utah. So shout out to my local friends if anybody's here. It's hard to believe sometimes this is my view every day. So I work for Confluent, is a software as a service company, and I lead their immigration and mobility programs. I've been there for 6 years, and I've been in the space, like Brendan mentioned, about 14.
My name is Jill Sobel. I am an Assistant General Counsel, Director of Global Mobility for KLA Corporation, and we're in the computer chip industry. We make the machines that help make the computer chips. I'm a U.S. immigration attorney, so I started my immigration practice back in 2007, and I was in private practice for years before going in-house and in healthcare during the pandemic. That was fantastic timing, and now transitioned over to tech.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. Tom, you're lucky enough to have our first question today. So what is your program's approach or views on compliance generally? What factors do you think contribute to developing that approach? Whether it's risk tolerance, employee profile, what are you considering?
Sure. So this is kind of an interesting question for me because it has looked pretty different at each of the companies I've been with over the last decade or so. Currently, I would say that I tend to be very conservative in the compliance aspect. I don't, the thought always going through my mind is I don't want to end up on the news. And so everything that I do is kind of viewed through that lens of wanting to be compliant, wanting to instill a culture of compliance within our employee population. I will say that sometimes is not met with open arms internally with other stakeholders who have a differing view, and that could be something that's really challenging. How to balance that with others who may not share the same risk tolerance or risk assessment. But currently we do tend to be very we try to be very educated, so attending sessions like these, a lot of lunch and learns within the team, attending different sessions that are available through various immigration providers, subscribing to news alerts so that we are always aware of what's happening in the space, not just here in the U.S., but globally, and making sure that we have at least assessed that risk from our client or our standpoint, and making sure that we have implemented steps to mitigate that risk, depending on where we're traveling, the types of traveling profiles that we may.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So, Jill, kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit, we're seeing a lot of digitization when it comes to compliance. So how has your organization's approach to global mobility sort of evolved in response to an increased emphasis on compliance from governments around the world as they are leveraging technology? So I'm thinking like the ETA in the UK and that sort of digitization?
Yeah, so they know where you are and they know how long you've been there, and they're going to tell you if you aren't compliant, right? So I think the days of like laissez-faire, they're not paying attention, so you don't have to pay too much attention. Those days are over, and they have been over for a while. So then the challenge internally is making sure that the business understands that those days are over. And that change management can be really tough. And it requires, not only like a top-down commitment, which we have at our company, and I'm very thankful for that. We have a high emphasis on being a reliable partner to our customers. And so if you can find the way at your company that it's important for the company and you can fit your compliance into that messaging, you're going to be much more effective at getting down to the people who are actually doing the travel so that they understand that, yes, there's a tool that's broken at a customer, and yes, the customer wants you there yesterday. But you have got to be compliant while you're doing it, because if we're creating a problem for our customer, that's way worse in ways than just, getting a slap on the wrist at, when you go to exit the country.
Yeah, and I think it's okay. I'll chime in on this one. I think one of the more interesting aspects of compliance generally today is just the spotlight that it's increasingly gathering, and it's not a spotlight just in sessions like these where we're talking about them. It's a spotlight for governments now in a way that it hasn't been in the past. A lot of the rules have always existed. Everybody's expected to be compliant, but there's kind of this old adage, the risk of discovery of non-compliance is low, but the impact is high. And now I think we tweak that adage. The risk of discovery is much higher because of all of these different implementations where, governments are doing what probably a lot of people in this room have been asking for a long time. Can you adopt technology? Can you do things that actually streamline and make this process more effective? The other side of that, though, is, well, now, yes, governments are doing that, are leveraging technology, and then they're saying, well, we're going to use it to also ensure compliance in a way that maybe we were incapable of doing in the past. You're not just filling out a little card that they put in a box somewhere and it goes away when you make your entry, and hoping that they don't flip through it if there's somebody that overstays. Now, automatic notifications are going to officers because, they go, we know that you entered at this time, we took your picture, we got your fingerprints, we know exactly what you said you're going to be doing, and now we have real mechanisms to be able to check on that. So it's a little bit of a shift in a viewpoint, I think, for organizations to say, we've always known that this has existed. We know what the rules are, but maybe it doesn't require so much effort and resourcing and thought because the impacts have been kind of hit or miss, right? Now, because that likelihood of discovery is so much higher, and mostly due to the technological implementations that governments have made, it becomes a little bit more at the forefront of everybody's minds that, this is really a lens that we have to look through when we're running immigration programs or running mobility programs. So a little bit of a different time.
When I think another topic sort of near dear to your heart, Brendan, this might be a leading question then for you, but, where do you think companies sometimes stumble in their approach to business visa travel and short-term assignments?
Yeah, I think another hot topic that is hand in hand with compliance, frankly, and it probably extends out even just from business travel and short-term assignments. A couple of areas where I think the chatter is happening a little bit more lately with employers that do have business travel programs or do have short-term assignments, people that maybe can travel to to locations where work can be undertaken, but it's a different type of easier visa to get or whatever it might be. The first place that we see companies really having to grapple with things is ownership of just these programs, right? Ownership of a business travel program, ownership of compliance generally. Where does that sit? Where does that fall? And frankly, a lot of different teams that it could fall under probably say, I don't want it, right? That should go over here. And so really determining that ownership is more important now for pretty much the same reason, that what's resulted from the spotlight on compliance generally. probably could have gotten away with not having much oversight over some of these things with, minimal risk of impact. But now that compliance is something that can be tracked so thoroughly by government authorities, somebody does have to own it, right? Somebody does need to be watching after it, because that risk of discovery of noncompliance has just increased so much.
You're saying that risk of Tom ending up on the news is just...
Yeah, exactly. So some people like Tom might say, well, you know what, I'm actually more comfortable owning this so that I don't end up in the news. But really finding out where that sits in your organization is pretty important, more important than it has been. And then, on the business travel front in particular, a lot of organizations that we've seen, typically often those business travel needs will be handled by a non-global mobility team, right? It'll be a business travel team, your travel provider, whoever that might be. But given the way that, the economy has gone and how businesses have strategized just their internal constructs, that's often being brought into global mobility more consistently. And whether that's a efficiency thing or it is a compliance thing because the business wants more robust oversight over it, it's definitely trending in that direction too. And then, that brings the compliance considerations, not just for business travel, but into the mobility program overall. You're probably either consolidating those things. You want one seamless solution for compliance oversight generally.
I mean, I would say, Brendan, that it's ending up with global mobility because we're subject matter experts on it. Your teams are subject matter experts on it. Whereas the travel teams are, helping people get from, travel, right? They're doing the plans. But when it comes to knowing what somebody needs, even from just like a business meeting sort of perspective, it's our teams that know that stuff. And one of the points that you made, and I just want to highlight as a takeaway for everybody in the room, is that business travel compliance it doesn't start with who can track it. It starts when the business is planning for the person to go. And that's where you bring that value add to the business and to their operations. If you can establish your team as a trusted partner and start talking to them about planning and being aware of what's required for their people to travel here or there, then you're working on compliance right there at that point. And so you don't have to worry about are we tracking, because we are building personal responsibility within the business, managers and the employees, so that they're compliance minded themselves. It's going to make your job a lot better. And Tom is worried about your name being in the news. I don't ever want the CEO to say my name. That's my goal. I don't ever want to say, why wasn't Jill doing this? Why wasn't Jill's team on top of this?
Absolutely. Actually, Jill, this is kind of a good jumping off for you then. Can you tell me a little bit about if someone's new to global immigration and compliance, how and when should they leverage their immigration partner? And then kind of follow up to that, what about their internal teams? How do they keep everyone aligned?
So your immigration partner, which is hopefully a fantastic immigration firm that is providing you responsive service, is going to help you with the day-to-day. They should be keeping you on the straight and narrow with the day-to-day compliance. They should be helping you make sure that you have your public access files in order and that you have the documentation you're supposed to keep and that you know how long somebody can stay in a country. And they're telling your employees that, right? Like that's compliance and that's the day-to-day and they should just be doing it. And that's wonderful. And so now they've done their job. But you internally, you have to be maintaining these documents and following up with your people. And so it goes from your immigration partner doing that day-to-day work, and you should be tapping into them throughout the year to do your compliance checks, to be doing your small self audits, or maybe just to check in and say, hey, are we straight in Austria? We haven't looked at it in 3 years. What's new? Because the laws are constantly changing. And if you're not going back in a regular cadence, you don't have a plan to go back in a regular cadence to look at it, you're going to slowly kind of wiggle maybe out of compliance. But where do you start in Austria, right? Like you're not Austrian, you don't, you don't have any expertise, but your immigration partner will. And so you should go to them and say, hey, we're looking at Austria. What do we need to know? And that could be your jumping off point.
Maybe you should go to Vienna though and just check things out.
Look, first you got to eat the desserts in Vienna. Yeah, that's why we all got into global mobility.
So, Tom, something near and dear to your heart, AI. So, again, thinking I'm brand new to global immigration compliance, how would you sort of empower your company to set policy? And, you know, if it's brand new, you know, maybe your organization is growing. You had one sponsored employee, now you've got 25, and it's suddenly getting bigger and bigger. Are you leveraging AI at all to kind of help develop policy? And what do you need to be thinking about?
So yeah, this is an interesting topic and a new one for me, relatively new, right? That when I started my career, AI was just a pipe dream. And I would say, especially kind of straddling the last question too, if I were new starting out today, what piece of advice would I give specifically in relation to AI is not a substitute for qualified legal advice. I think that, you know, we're all very excited. I'm sure we're all feeling pressure from our organizations to be implementing AI tools, to be using this. Absolutely, we should. Keep in mind that AI is not a substitute for qualified legal advice. We're just not there. And I think that as soon as we acknowledge that, we kind of free ourselves to exploring more options and tools. And what I mean by that is, I love AI for its helpfulness, for its ability to scour the internet, to help educate myself. So when I have a question and something I haven't encountered before, then I'm going to one of these tools and I'm doing some research, but always with a little bit of knowledge that this isn't comprehensive and that it's highly situational. It's highly dependent on multiple variables. And so I want to educate myself, and then I can turn to our legal provider and say, here's my understanding of what the entry and exit requirements are for South Korea. Can you let me know if this is accurate? Can you let me know if this is right? I'm sure all of you, or at least many of you, have had an experience where an employee reaches out and says, hey, I am planning to go here. It looks like I'm good to go and I don't need to do anything else. And you're like, where did you get this information from? Because that is not jiving with what I understand. And as you peel back those layers, they're saying, yeah, I found this on the internet, or here's what ChatGPT said. Or I can just go on a digital nomad visa and I'm good to work here for the next 6 months. And so there's a lot of course breadthing and just understanding that there are limitations with some of these tools, not to be afraid of those, but also to embrace them with the understanding that they are not comprehensive, that they're maybe flawed, that again, there are so many variables when working with these tools and around immigration, that it may depend on this person's nationality. It may depend on how much time they've spent there previously. It may depend on what they're going to do, or all of these things combined, and those may not have been input into a tool. So be accepting, but be a little bit skeptical, would be my advice. As it comes to involving other stakeholders, as we mentioned, I've had that experience where, again, there may be others who are not so welcoming of my views on risk and compliance and tolerance. And I would also say that as much as you can use data to drive a point home, that is really where I found wins in my career, is using data to support my position. And it's very easy if you're new to mobility, and this I was guilty of this as well, sitting in conferences, you're just like drinking from a fire hose of information. And when I was brand new, I remember just sitting on the flight home from Boston thinking, we're so screwed. We don't do any of these things. Nobody's even thinking about it. And I just had this like pit in my stomach of how are we going to tackle all of these things? And after I had some time to sit on it and digest it, I view mobility and compliance on this sliding scale of there's good, better, and best. And so if you're not even at good yet, don't try to get to best now. Just start with, let me get to good. And once I can get to good, let me get a little bit better. And those are the things that can be helpful in helping to set policy for an organization, to encourage buy-in from stakeholders. So using data, using a reasonable and logistical approach. And then finally, the other thing to go along with that is just, it's very easy to make the chicken little and say like the sky is falling and we need to be 100% compliant as of right now. And you're quickly going to get the reputation of just like, Tom's all doom and gloom. And every time he opens his mouth, he's just telling us why we need to be doing something else. And so I think recognizing that, being honest with yourself and with your program and your needs. So currently we don't do a lot of work in Latin America. And so Latin American issues, yes, I want to be aware of them, but I'm not going to let those trouble me to the point where I'm losing sleep and feeling like I need to drive policy for Latin America business travel compliance, because it's just not something that we face on a day-to-day basis. On the other hand, in APAC or in EMEA, that's something we're dealing with on a daily basis. And those are the areas where I'm going to focus on being aware, being savvy, and driving policies, helping to drive policies that will ensure compliance. And that is a place where we can leverage language learning models, right? Where we can go to them to say, I need to create a policy for business travelers around this specific area. Again, don't just turn it loose. Work with your council to review that, to provide insights and updates, and use those two tools in parallel and in tandem.
I think just jumping off of what Tom, you were just mentioning, in the prep meetings that we've all had across this group, one thing that comes up pretty thematically is that if you can come from a starting point, so as a new person kind of entering this work and on the corporate side, if you can come into this discovery process first, making sure to really truly understand your organization itself. That comes down to risk tolerance. It comes down to what company goals are, everything about the organization, and understand that mobility, can be something should be something that is valuable and fundamental to all of how all of that works. All of a sudden you create an environment where you can be looking through that lens as you are developing policy, as you are kind of making new implementations that are based on your mobility program. And so the AI thing is an interesting, aspect of that, because realistically, I don't know about but when I'm entering things to AI, I'm trying to do the best, most specific prompt possible. And sometimes I have in the back of my mind, I'm really telling this thing like a lot of very specific information about me. But, in an instance where maybe, Tom, you look something up on AI and you want to vet it by legal counsel, all of a sudden you're actually, telling legal counsel a lot more specifics about your business, right? And those understandings about where the business is going, what it needs to do. But then you're also creating this avenue for additional brainstorming, really, right? And finding new maybe pathways that are so well curated and tailored to your program based on the fact that you already went through this process of articulating this very specifically. So now we can talk about these kind of details. But when you as a mobility professional go in and have that true deep understanding of what your business needs, wants, and where it's going to go, and what the culture is like and the risk tolerance, and then you bring that to your immigration provider, all of a sudden the information that you're getting is curated towards you with that understanding. And even better, if your immigration provider does have, either long-standing experience or a big portfolio of clients that they're working with, the benchmarking benefits of that with those understandings can go a really long way, right? It can influence your strategy. You say, we've seen this for company A, B, C, and D. They're constructed very similarly to you all. This has been successful. Don't do this because this was not successful. Gives you a little bit of a lead, a jumping off point there.
So AI can kind of help enrich the topic that you're eventually bringing to your legal partners. I think that's great. So you've kind of answered this a little bit, Brendan, but you've been working with clients for years now. You've enumerated as many years at the top of this panel. And what do you see commonly as factors that clients are considering with risk tolerance?
Yeah, I think, we've talked about the environment a little bit now. The risk tolerance is probably, just as a general concept, getting a little bit less tolerant, just given the emphasis on compliance and all of the tools now that the governments are utilizing to be able to track things. But first and foremost, it really comes down to industry and your company, right? If you are in a business where you are closing contracts with new customers very quickly, and the only way to execute on those contracts is to show up somewhere tomorrow, you may be a little bit more willing to get creative with some of the options that you consider. And, the cost benefit analysis goes into that. If risk of discovery is really low, but the benefit to the business in terms of revenue or profit is going to be really high, then that's kind of probably always going to be baked into, what solutions you're willing to take forward and what's going to work best for your business. If on the other hand, it's, we have everything forecasted out 2 to 5 years into the future, we know exactly what we're going to need when we need it, and we have lead time, you can be more risk averse, right? And that ends up working out. So your business really drives the risk tolerance factors. I think, of course, if you've always been risk tolerant and then all of a sudden something happens, all of a sudden we jump back to risk aversion, right? And you're a little bit more prepared on that front. So really the experience, the industry that you're in, and then, what is important from a company goals, a company values standpoint, and how do we want to make sure that we tell everybody that we live those values, live those ideals. And then finally, just, the climate, the immigration climate in general. You can be more risk tolerant if it seems like, yes, these rules are here and they're in place, but the government doesn't seem to be prioritizing these kind of things, or it's overly prioritizing these kind of things. Changes, as we all see, administration to administration, what that translates out to. But those all go into the equation, really.
But now I'm curious. Yeah, Jill, go ahead.
I want to give a hot tip to everybody here in the room. I want to set you free. Okay, so listen up. Our job in global mobility is to understand what the risk is. And our immigration partners, our immigration attorney friends, they're going to help us know what it is. Are we talking about fines? Are we talking about detention? Are we talking about deportation? What are we talking about? And then our job is to take it to the business and say, here's what the risks are. You choose your own adventure. And I know that as somebody, I'm a very conscientious person, and it will stress me out thinking like, oh my God, they're making the wrong decision. But it's not for us. It's for your business to make those decisions. And there's a lot of freedom and sleepful nights knowing that you gave the business what they need to make their best decision.
So, Tom, you have a comment?
Yeah, everybody just wrote that down.
Yeah. So useful.
Honestly, it is not yours to stress and be on the hook for. But getting that information in front of the right people, into the right hands, is so key. And I think, as Brendan was mentioning too, the part of the problem with a session like this is this room is so diverse. The companies that you work with or work for are so diverse. And so immigration compliance, the risk tolerance looks different depending on your maturity cycle of your company. Like Brendan mentioned, if you're a startup, you're probably going to be doing a lot of things that maybe a seasoned company like GM is not going to be happy with. And that's okay, as long as you are making that decision with the right knowledge and through the right lens. Similarly, the industries are so specific, right? Like, how do I, as a technology company where my work is just done by carrying a laptop, how is that different from me? Like, am I working remotely versus am I just traveling with my laptop on vacation with my family and I might check emails each day at the end of the day? Is that work or is it not work? And understanding what that looks like and understanding is, as a company, do we want to allow that? And that's very different from someone who is repairing machinery or equipment and says, I'm only going to be here for 3 days, but I'm coming with a very specific task. And I'm coming here to do work, that may be very different from someone that's just carrying their laptop. And so it's hard for us to say this is what you should or shouldn't be doing, because it's so situational, it's so dependent upon just so many different factors. But working together with partners, working together with external counsel, but working together internally with your payroll teams, with your legal team, with your tax team, and talking together and say, hey, can we schedule some time to talk about this? Here's what I understand the risks may be, but I understand that that's just one small piece of the puzzle, and generating revenue may take priority to that. That may look differently in different countries. again, if the penalty is, yeah, you're going to be fined $500 if you're violating this, like our company's probably going to say we're okay with that. If the penalty is you may go to jail or you may face like an embargo of being able to import products, that's going to have a lot bigger impact to that decision-making process. And so understanding what those penalties are, what does non-compliance look like, that can be an uncomfortable conversation to have with your legal counsel, but to say, our competitors, they seem to be getting around this. What are they doing? Or what, like, we want to be compliant, but also what does like non-compliance look like? And I understand that makes it uncomfortable, but like, again, if we're talking about, yeah, you may just get a fine versus you're going to be deported and banned from re-entering this country, that changes how you approach things, and it changes the amount of risk you're willing to take on when it may just be a financial impact or it may impact the actual lives of your employees.
So then, Tom, we've been talking a lot about being risk averse or, willing to take a little bit. We've been talking a lot about risk tolerance, but what does it look like to you to run a successful program that isn't just avoiding penalties? Like, what does a successful program look like? Keeping in mind risk tolerance, of course, but other factors of that.
Last time I Googled my name, I still have not been on the news, so I'm feeling okay. I think, again, being in tongue in cheek, like just avoiding penalties is not really the risk, because as we've talked about, governments, local jurisdictions are becoming a lot more aware of this. They are tracking it, monitoring it more closely. They are implementing tools and technologies to make sure that they are aware of who is where and what are they doing. And so it's not enough just to set it and forget it, or this laissez-faire mentality that Jill mentioned. It does take active management, and it does take us being aware of what's happening, how those pieces are moving, and educating our employee population, finding support internally, going to your leaders and saying, this has just changed. The way that the UK is doing their visas, it's not just a paper visa, or it's not just a visa waiver. It does require us to register and have a clearance or travel authorization in advance, making sure that resources are available to employees, that they are searchable, that they're identifiable, making sure that you've taken time to educate your employee population about what changes are happening. And I think success starts to look like you have trust that you're building internally. You have a brand that you are maintaining internally, as this is a team or this is a person that I can come to that will help me understand what I'm supposed to do. And they will help me be successful. If I run into problems, I know who to contact, I know what to do, and I have trust and confidence in that person or this team to have my back. And that to me has been the most rewarding part, as people that have traveled who are very nervous say, hey, everything went great. I got back in, or I got there okay. And I was prepared. I knew what I needed to say or what I needed to do when I showed up, and I had everything ready to go. Like that's probably one of the highest compliments that I can get. And that's the work that never gets noticed, right, by anybody else. And I know that that's not why we do it, but just that satisfaction of saying, okay, I made a difference for that person and helped them in a time that was stressful or concerning.
That's the best feeling, knowing that you made someone else feel comfortable in an extremely stressful period of their life. So, Jill, question for you. What benchmarks or metrics should companies track to assess their program's maturity?
Okay, I don't know. Maybe I was the best person for this, because at my heart, I'm an attorney, and I'm like, who cares? Just get it done. So Tom, who I apparently want to be when I grow up, is going to have something to add. But I'm going to answer it as an attorney would. So I'd say the first thing that I think about is, do you have a compliance plan? Or is compliance just something that's kind of happening on the side? Because I think most of us are dealing with high volume work. And so we're getting the work done, and we're getting the people where they need to be, and we're getting them where they need to be when the business needs them. And that's our success. But that means that we might not we're not taking the time to put together an actual compliance plan. So like number one, do you have a compliance plan? And if you have one, are you executing on it? So I can put a compliance plan together, and then Envoy helps me with over 3,000 requests we get every year, and I've done no actual affirmative compliance, executing on my compliance plan. So are you executing on it? And then the last thing that I'm looking at, am I successful, or are we doing what we need to do, is my compliance plan stakeholder facing? So do they know that what we are doing is compliance and is it meeting the business's needs? Is it a responsive compliance plan? Because my super strict compliance plan, and I was just thinking, I'm a nobility, not a mobility person. Like that's not a compliance plan that's mature and that's meeting the business's needs. Tom, talk about benchmark.
Yeah, this is actually one I would love when we have Q&A to hear from you about what you're doing. But yeah, I think that I'm much like Jill. Metrics can be hard until they're not. And so again, recognizing that pretty much everyone in this room, I'm sure that business travel compliance is just one small piece of what you do or what your responsibilities are on a day-to-day basis. And so it can be easy to kind of ignore it, right? And treat it like, I'll get to that when it becomes a problem, or if it becomes a problem. And it's kind of a scary thing, but we all make those decisions as we're working and prioritizing our workflows and our tasks. Benchmarks and metrics, though, that can be helpful is first identifying your policy. What is your policy? Or do you even have one? And if not, probably a good place to start. Second, is our policy well known? And have we socialized this program or our policy, and do we follow it? Because in the event of fines or in the event of an audit, right, we all know that it's not enough. It's no longer defensible to say, like, I didn't have time for that, or that wasn't really like top priority for us. But equally probably as indefensible now is to say, yeah, we have a policy, but like nobody really follows it. And so starting there, do we, if our policy is that you can spend up to a week in a country for 2 weeks or 30 days, whatever that policy is, are we actually tracking that? And what are we doing about people who are not compliant? Do we talk to them? Do we have a conversation? Do we put restrictions on there? If we're not even able to track that, how do we go about tracking that? Can we look at time off requests? I will say our company now, we have a horrible culture of logging time off requests. We have a flexible time off policy, so we're not limited in the number of days. And because of that, the culture has been that managers don't require their direct reports to put time off in. And I think, as many of you probably experienced last month, that was really stressful suddenly to say, where are all of our H-1B holders? Are they in the country? I don't know, because nobody's put in their time off. And all of a sudden, all of these holes were exposed. And so now we have this great action plan of ways that we are going to fix this and ways that we will address that to create requirements around that and enforcement, to create mailboxes so people can notify us if they're traveling, to talk about requiring like Slack updates if they're working remotely from another location, or out of office requirements to put on an automatic reply. Like all of these things go together. Some companies implement IP address tracking, some don't, some do it intermittently, but starting with something and working up from there, right? That this is, again, it's a work in progress. I don't think any of us would be in this session right now if we felt like I'm 100% in every country and in all that I do as it relates to this. We're here because we want to get better. We want to share ideas and tips of how do we do that? How do we make it happen and improve? And I'm here for the exact same reason, right? I want to learn and identify areas where we may be underperforming and say, how do we fix this? How can we be more compliant? How can we share that information with partners and stakeholders and move forward in the right direction so that none of us here end up on the news?
So one of the toughest tasks I gave this, yeah, please.
Just one very briefly. I think that all is, even thinking about things along those lines and kind of putting it together. Okay, these can be some of the metrics we'll call, quote unquote, to make sure that one, we develop an actual policy, but two, that we're thinking about it in a live sense to incorporate things as they're coming up. I think the addition of something that is just a proactive check-in for revision or to keep something, or with the times on a whatever recurring basis, setting that up ends up going a long way for a lot of organizations as well. Especially because if you looked at that policy, like easy example, if you looked at your policy today and you looked at something that was maybe in place 4 or 5 years ago when this was, less of a discussion point, you may be looking at a lot of different language, and to be able to be ahead of that by just having the dedicated time process for getting into it, I think is also something that helps keep the business successful.
I mean, your policies should expire, right? And I always look at a policy. We should be looking at policies, this is my personal opinion, every 2 to 3 years. If you're doing it more often than that, then maybe think about how good your policy is. Like maybe it wasn't the right policy to begin with. But like every 2 to 3 years, you should be touching your policy, put an expiration date on it. If you have a policy tracking software, it will pop up in an email that says it's time for you to look at the policy.
So the toughest task I gave all of you was to sort of distill a very complex topic that is compliance into sort of your elevator pitch tip for this group that came here today. What do you want people to be going away thinking about in terms of something they could action? We're starting with you.
Okay, I'll go first. As I distill. I think, one of the things just being on the service provider side that becomes, just so critical and important, allows us, I think, to be perceived as a good partner that ends up resulting in success for the business's program, is finding that right way to get the type of company and cultural knowledge for each individual organization that will allow us to tailor a lot of the things that we're, hopefully preparing for you and educating on. And so, really just very basic, tangible takeaway is make sure that there is some touch point, whether it's a one-time overarching kind of meeting to just dive in deep. What are the company's goals? What is the company's risk tolerance, in your opinion, as my partner? What are, the profiles of employees that you tend to send, business travel, long-term travel, individual assignments? What does that look like generally, right? And, where have you seen this is, usually the big one that every vendor will ask, but what have been your pain points to date? And, do you think that this is something that just is the way that it is, or should it be a little bit more creative in the approach? And so getting that deep understanding, but actually setting aside the time to discuss that, to get that going, both at the early stages of working together, but then, maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's every half a year, maybe it's annually, but some kind of dedicated time set aside to really knowing what's going on with the business, how the employees interact, how the culture is of the company now. It just goes such a long way in building the trust and partnership, because then we'll respond in turn, right? It's okay, everything is through this lens. But also, it allows for just the actually tailoring of the way that we're all working together in a way that will better achieve the goals of the business, because everybody's on the same page with understanding what those are.
So in terms of eating the elephant one bite at a time, just get a call on the calendar. Just get a call on the calendar. Tiny bite. Tom?
Yeah, I would say that too. Just starting small, starting with low-hanging fruit, as the term goes, right? That it's easy to be overwhelmed. It's easy to feel frustrated. Easy to feel like you have this impossible task in front of you. And if you focus on that, it will be very overwhelming. But start small. Be honest with yourself about where you are at. Like, are we 10% compliant? I don't know. Like, how do we measure that? That can be difficult, but say, what process or controls do we have in place? And if that answer is 0, that's okay. So at least you know where to go and you can move forward. Data becomes a huge tool in your toolbox to say, what sources of data can I leverage to help paint a picture? So if we don't have a company actively managing our business travel, maybe we're backing into expense information to say how many people are traveling on an annual basis, or maybe there is a little bit of data to say where are people traveling, or company calendars and what events is the company sponsoring for conferences or for offsites and team gatherings, so that you can start painting a picture of how big is business travel in my organization, and what do I do with that information once I have that? Because that will allow you to prioritize and start focusing on the areas, like the high touch areas. Okay, we have a ton of people traveling to Japan every year. We don't really have a policy for Japan. Let's start there. Or we have this huge, conference every year that our organization puts on in the US, in Seattle or Las Vegas or wherever, and we have a ton of incoming employees coming in. Okay, let's start there and let's start addressing, let's provide resources to employees so they know how to go through the process to obtain ESTA or a B1, B2 visa. So they have the documents. I could provide resources, I could create operational efficiencies. There are places where all of us can start. And again, we don't have to start with the end in mind to say, I'm going to have like a best in class or world class compliance system. I'm going to start where I am and start small and start gaining partners internally, start socializing that, asking them for help or ideas of ways to collaborate together and solve some problems. And so that's my advice, or the key takeaway is just start small. Do something. You don't have to be best right now. You can start with good and work your way up from there.
Jill.
Okay. Be intentional. That's it. You got to think about compliance. You got to put it on your calendar as your to-do. You have to be intentional about it. For me, the way that I started is I started with the list. What are my compliance points in the United States? And then you take it to your immigration professional, your attorneys, and say, thinking about these things. Do you have a compliance plan that I can see? Are there any white papers? You could go to AI. Hey, AI, create a U.S. immigration compliance plan for me. Then take it to your immigration partners and say, is this right? Is this what we should be looking at? So you're going to be intentional. You can start with something as easy as a list, and then, each year build it into what you're doing and then do it. That's the hardest part.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, panel. We're going to go into Q&A. So anyone that has a question for our lovely panel, now's your chance. We do have a microphone. We can run around. Someone requires that. Okay, don't be shy. This is your chance. You didn't get enough actionable takeaways from this team. Oh, we got one down here.
My question is thinking about how government is using AI now, and the struggle that we've come in is we've done it right, and then AI has come in and said, there's an RFE or there's something. And so how do you develop a strategy to combat AI being used on the other side? Whether it's right or wrong, it seems like, that's adding to costs, obviously, but just stress for our employees when we get an RFE that makes no sense. And so that's, to me, that's a compliance problem. But then how do you combat that if it's also new, but you have a government that, let's just say may not know what they're looking at. And so they send an RFE for something, and then your attorney goes, well, that's ridiculous. But then we have to take the time to answer it. And so that's what I was curious about, is how you guys are combating, government AI use, and how to build a strategy to make that more efficient from your business standpoint.
So my answer to this is that this work starts before you get the RFE. So you should be instilling confidence in your immigration partner, your attorneys, with your employees and with the management. If you have a disagreement with your immigration attorney, you keep that between you and your immigration attorney. Go after them. Ask Envoy. Sometimes I'm like, hey guys, what's up, right? We've got things to talk about. But when you are talking with your employees and with with the business, you need to be instilling confidence in those immigration attorneys so that when you get that ridiculous RFE that we cannot control and we're only going to see more of them, and your immigration attorneys say, this is a bunch of trash. Don't worry about this. We're going to take care of it. The law's on our side. Your employees and your business has confidence in the attorneys. I've seen it work the other way, where, if maybe your immigration counsel isn't that great, think about getting a new one. But if there isn't that confidence, then it doesn't matter because you've undermined that that whole process. And it makes your life as the global mobility practitioner, it makes your life really difficult too, right? It puts you in a bad spot if you look it up for yourself.
Yeah, I think I would just add quickly, this is really, your question is really along the lines of just the technological, sort of implementations by governments more recently. And, I'm sure most here would probably agree, but anytime new technology has been rolled out to replace manual processes within a government process, there tends to be at least, hopefully only 3-6 months of this kind of thing happening where you're getting responses or glitches or bugs or things where, your whole applications are getting lost because the new platform that was just rolled out and developed by the governments are, we're being the beta testers, right? And so on that front, if I can be, not always all that common in the mobility space, but if I can be glass half full on this one, that maybe it should get better, right? Over the course of time and as there's a sample size. Right now, I love what Jill just mentioned. There is a lot of the expectation setting that goes into making this go more smoothly if some of these challenges are going to arise where you go, you throw up your hands and you say, this is ridiculous. Everybody needs to be on the same page that it's ridiculous, right? But from there, if you're, just in a practical sense, then you address it, right? The best way that you can, and probably in a very similar way to that we would have addressed it if AI wasn't the reason that, something like that came back, or automation wasn't the reason that something like that came back. Maybe down the road, there's some technology on the other side that balances that out. But we've seen ridiculous RFEs in the past. If they increase because of the over leveraging of technology and in too early of a stage, they're going to have to be addressed. The expectation setting part, I think, is really critical.
We have another question in the back. Thank you for that question.
While you're walking. Yeah, I think another thing that you could do is when you hear about these implementations, you can let key stakeholders within the organization know. So in EMEA right now, in the EU, they're implementing automatic file upload for applications, and it's been just a nightmare. But we told everybody, it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to take longer. Sorry. And so it's a nightmare and it takes longer.
Yeah.
Nobody, we're all on board.
Yeah.
Hi, so it's kind of a big question, but if you could just pick one thing, what is your greatest concern, the highest, greatest compliance concern, the highest enforcement risk? And then what would you say to us, let's say that we have it, to immediately do to combat?
I think it's funny that some of our hardest people to get on board are the people that are most at risk, and that would be our executives. So executives as very public figures, as high income or high wage earners, are most probably at risk of business travel compliance risk from not just an immigration perspective, but a tax perspective as well. Looking at governments that want to go after lost or missed revenue, that to me is my biggest concern. And I find that it sometimes is funny that our executives are the ones that are the most cavalier, just I'm not really worried about that. And so for me, again, finding data, finding examples to say, look, this could result in X amount of dollars in fines, or this public exposure. I know that they want to avoid being on the news just as much as I do, but that's the one that surprises me the most, that causes me the most heartburn. It's less about like the low level engineer, spending 31 days in a country. It's more about the high level, high profile individuals.
Yeah, Tom, I would agree with you. I think, one of the things that we've seen more recently, the high visibility tech implementations that are going on right now, right? The ETA in UK very much in forefront of everybody's mind. You have to do something now. When you originally were visa exempt, you now have to do something. ETIAS coming down the road, same thing in the EU. A number of others throughout the world. So, what do those implementations do? First, you now have a requirement when you just didn't used to. So if the knowledge is there, or the understanding that you have to do something is there, all of a sudden, maybe at best, you're not allowed to get on the plane. At worst, you are allowed to get on the plane, and you're now encountering some immigration officers at the destination country, having to answer some tough questions, right? But the longer term impact, even as knowledge of the existence of these programs grows, is that it's, as we were saying earlier, it's so much easier to track everyone, what they are doing, what they said they were doing, and how long they're staying in a given jurisdiction, visa exempt. Not everybody is great at tracking their own time as they're in a certain location. So now all of a sudden, the government most likely knows more than you do about, the reason that you're there, what you're allowed to do based on that reason, and how long you can stay and how long you have been there. So I think when you kind of paired at the perfect time, when people have been on remote worker status or visa status, but as they say, I'm a remote worker, but this country doesn't require a visa, so I just go, in this basic way. Those are kind of the most prominent, visible things that we're seeing right now, because it's just stuff people didn't have to think about previously, right? Now all of a sudden it's important, but you got to learn and know that it's important, and you have to act accordingly after it.
Jill, final word.
Final word. I'm worried about reputational risk to the company. So I'm looking at what our government's looking at, and how is my company's name going to end up in the headlines? And if you're going to go home today in the United States of America, and you're going to look at 1 point of immigration compliance, you're going to go home and you're going to look at your Form I-9s. And you're going to do an audit, and you're going to fix them because they're messed up. I've never had a client whose Form I-9s were not, needing a little bit of help. And then everybody's going to sleep better at night, because you're not going to be Walmart with $6 million of fines or whatever a few years ago, because that's what the government cares about. And that's what your leadership should care about, because you want to protect your company's reputation.
Absolutely. I-9s could be a whole other session. Thank you so much, Jill and Tom and Brendan. And thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your time. Yeah.